Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Awaken the World. It is the last day of September already in the year 2021, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You are here live on the Awaken the World group, Truth and Reconciliation. Good to see you all. Hello, hello, hello. It's been kind of a rainy day today here. Pretty much rain all day, and that's fine. We love the rain. So first of all, as always, let me express my love for each and every one of you. And I don't see anyone yet, but I know that I see Kelly's commenting. It takes time, I think, for it to actually pop up. So what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, this is there. Now I see it's working. I see Susan. Hi, Susan. How are you doing? And apparently Louisa too, according to Kelly, but I don't see Louisa yet. We're going to talk about. There's Louisa. It's funny, and maybe this is why I never used to get to see the comments before. It's like, oh, look, another comment. So, well, what is, Truth and Reconciliation Day? Well, this is a new dreamt up concept here in Canada to deal with what we all allowed to happen to First Nations peoples in this country. And, I got to tell you that, I'm going to use Remembrance Day as the example, okay? So, Remembrance Day. It's a day when we go out there and we're supposedly supposed to honor all of those who fought and died, in order to keep us free. And as someone who was part of that, I got to tell you that if we really wanted to remember Remembrance Day, we would end war. We would end that need for, standing in death's somber, bitter cold, all over war, all over the idea that there's an enemy out there. And I think, for me, the same thing applies when it comes to our First Nations. Making another holiday is literally what it becomes, a holiday. And yeah, maybe 1% of the population or 2% of the population will observe anything on that day or recall why. But it seems to me, just from watching what's happened with all the other days, that they get commercialized. The real reason for being there, the lesson we need to learn is lost in the rhetoric and in the talk and in the grandstanding. And it becomes something we do once a year. And this isn't about Truth and Reconciliation Day here in Canada. This is actually about the truth and reconciliation that we all need to do, because there's no institution, no government, no organization on this planet that is not a reflection of the apparently individuated egos within it. And if you remember, I've talked about this many a times, we'd all like to think that we all have these individuated egos. And there's a lot of crazy courses and other belief system out there that try and convince you that somehow that ego of yours is yours and yours alone, instead of understanding that it's nothing more than one ego manifesting itself in mirrored form, and what you would perceive as differences have to do with the experience that one egoic form is taking, that apparent one egoic form is taking part in. That is the micro view of the macrocosm of creation itself, where that divine being apparently split itself into mirrored pieces, although it is still one. And every one of those pieces is imbued with that same divine being. So why is it important that we're going to talk about this sort of thing tonight? Well, I really do think it's very necessary on a lot of levels. And you know, I see a lot of posts and a lot of comments out there from people saying, you know, well, just choose love and focus on love, and that's not going to do it. And it never did. The idea of spirituality has nothing to do with choosing love, and yet it is everything to do with understanding that you are love itself. But we live here in a real world, and we're here in this real world to grow, to evolve, to experience. And we are the masters of our experience. So, you know, before we get too deep into the truth and reconciliation that we have to do with ourselves, not with anybody else. It's not about governments. It's not about who put what child in what school. It's not about who put what child in the ground. And I mean no people any disrespect at all by that, but it's not about that. Focusing on any of those things, focusing on what's already happened, it does nothing. Ultimately, it does nothing. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's not the way it's meant. We can still understand what's happened. We can still accept what's happened and deal with what's happened, but we should no longer be focusing there. We should be focusing on the real world present manifestations of that same issue that are still continuing on to this day. And we're not just talking about our First Nations here. So let's just take a little bit of a clearer look so we know exactly where we're at, okay? And this is by no means an inclusive list by any stretch of the imagination, but I just want to discuss briefly that in a country of 35 million people, which is roughly what Canada has, a little less to be honest, that 14% or 1 in every 7 people that you see walking around experience food insecurity. People who experience food insecurity are not getting enough food to keep their bodies healthy. And if they're not getting enough food to keep the body healthy, they're not getting enough food to keep the mind healthy. And interestingly enough, amongst people who have food insecurity issues, there is a prevalence of mental health issues, and one of the greatest ones, of course, is anxiety. Where am I going to get my next meal? How am I going to feed my children? Despite there being less than 35 million people in Canada, we have 235,000 recorded homeless. This does not include all the people who are living in vans, are living in RVs, are sitting out in the bush right now and trying to get by in campgrounds and in camps because they simply can't afford a place to live. In this country of less than 35 million people, 1.7 million people have a core housing need that is not being met. We need over 1.7 million homes for people built on top of what's already being built today. Can you imagine that number? And what happens when you're home insecure? All those other issues like mental health, like food insecurity. And for people who have homes, nearly 20% of those people this winter will have to make a hard choice between heat and eating. This is the world that we've driven ourselves to, and we're all complicit in this. Every single one of us. We all have a hand in everything that happens on this planet. And that's the truth that we have to face. It can, and understand this. I have watched the downfall of civilizations before, and quite frankly, I don't care whether you believe me or not. And the writing is on the wall for this one, except it's a lot bigger this time, and the fall's going to be a lot harder. It won't be the end of humanity. It's certainly not the end of the planet, but it will be the end of our way of life, and it will herald in suffering that will make the suffering of today look mild in comparison, and it's time for us to choose. And it begins with facing the truth. That we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. We can't sit back and wait for someone to do it for us. There's no agency, no agent that's going to pop out of nowhere and make everything right. And in fact, everything is right now. It's right in what it's showing us and what it's offering us. It's holding up a mirror to humanity and asking us, is this the way that you perceive yourselves? It's our own truth we have to face when we look at another of color, or of any different character, any different characteristic that makes them different than us. People who are really heavy set, people who are really thin and sickly, just by their nature. They don't have a good constitution. People who are addicted. People who are harming themselves or harming others. They're all expressions of that one whole. Every one of those beings, no matter what the state they're in, is God incarnate. That's the truth we have to face. We have to be willing to stop looking down because someone else chooses to behave differently or be different or believe differently. They are still a human being. And when we don't treat those people like human beings, those people who we would judge as different than ourselves in some way, the only thing we dehumanize is ourselves. It is that we take away from our own being. Because they're a reflection of what's in you. If we can come to terms with who we are, if we can face the truth, that every single one of us has a right to safety, to security, to a place to live, that won't change. That's one of the biggest worries about people that rent, is that in these crazed markets that we have with people with far too much money, buying home after home and then putting them out on Airbnb or renting them out to other wealthy, affluent people for money that no one else can afford, we're creating a situation where a vast majority of the population is literally living on edge. We all have to own that. And it's sad because I I really understand perfectly well why humanity has to go through this. I really do. I hate to say it. I wish I didn't understand, but I do understand. We've got a long way to go to wake up. There is no difference. It doesn't matter what you believe or not believe. It doesn't matter what faith you're part of or not part of. There is not a being on this planet in any shape or form that is somehow less than another, that somehow deserves less than another. And we have to take that truth into ourselves and be willing to pour it back into the world, to be that example of that truth, that we are all one. And as long as any one of the one is suffering, the one is suffering. If we can do that, we can start to care for each other in the ways that are necessary. We can come together and transform societies, indeed transform the world. What is it that we have to reconcile ourselves to? Well, that's exactly, reconciliation is not about talk. It's about what we're going to do. As Kelly is learning in her course right now, the issues for the First Nations still exist within the school system. And, this is an indication of how honest we're being with ourselves, while at the same time we have a holiday like today. It was just yesterday that the federal government lost its quiet appeal to keep compensation out of the hands of residential school survivors. It was in the news Wednesday afternoon, the day before National Truth and Reconciliation Day. The truth is, the government was still trying to screw the First Nations. We're the government. There isn't an entity or a force out there or a company that's evil, that isn't made up of us. Our reconciliation needs to be with ourselves. To realize what we've done, to realize the things that we've done in our unconscious states and our unconscious behavior, not to blame ourselves, but to take responsibility and ownership and realize that in the same way we had the power to do someone apparent harm, we have the power to do someone apparent good. To start making choices in every moment of our lives that support the world we want to see blossom around us. We're coming into hard times. This winter is going to be a tough winter for a lot of people across the globe and a lot of people on both coasts. We've got a lot of storms to go yet. When we're faced with storms, it's easy to revert to those old ways of behaving that we felt offered ourselves some degree of self-protectionism. The idea that there's an enemy out there in the world. The climate doesn't care what you look like. That divine consciousness doesn't give a rat's ass what color your skin is. You were made perfect exactly as you are. All of us bleed the same color of blood. All of us want to be able to hold our children and feel safe and secure for ourselves and for them and for their future. When we look closely at each other, when we stop, when we see the truth of our wholeness and we just look, we see that everyone around us is just like us. just like us. We need to reconcile ourselves to the new reality we're being offered. A world without borders, a world without discrimination, a world where all we see is each other in each other's eyes. That's it. That's all. I said I would keep it short tonight, and I meant it. I want to leave some food for thought to think about what steps you can take in your life to examine yourself and see where you're harboring, things inside of you that make someone's appearance or someone's beliefs or someone's idea make you feel that they're somehow less in some way. And to let that go and look upon them with new eyes, with fresh eyes. See the divine spirit of creation within them. That same divine spirit that's within you. Namaste. Have a beautiful Thursday night, I think. We'll talk again very soon. Take care.